Hi there folks, back again for another video. In this one, we're going to be hitting the whole tier maker list thing again because we're going to be looking at what are the best and worst of the evil side of the Hobbit. Now there's not so many to go through here, especially compared to some of the stuff from the Lord of the Rings and also from the good side of the Hobbit as well, to be honest. But there are some interesting sculpts and stuff in here. There's some interesting ways for you to go with some of the different armies and that kind of thing as well. And also there's just some armies of essentially one. But we'll see how this all comes together and what we think. So, we're going to be starting off. We're going to be diving into the head honcho himself, Azog, and his legion. So Azog and his legion represents both the, essentially, and more applicably, the forces that either fought at outside Moria at the gate of unpronounceable, I can't remember it. I think it's Azanulbazar, maybe. Someone can correct me in the comments. And also those that fought at the Battle of Five Armies at the same time. So you've got a whole bunch of armoured orcs, big trolls, everything else in between. You've got Azog on his white warg and all that kind of good stuff as well. It's an interesting force. It's probably the one that most people are going to be looking at when it comes to building something of a Hobbit force on the tabletop, and comes with an interesting selection of both resin, finecast and plastic, so a whole host of different things. So we're going to head on over to the website and have a look at it in here because there's an interesting selection of them. So you've got Azog himself. You've got Bolg, of course, as well. We'll come back to the Hunter Orcs in a second. But so you've got Azog, and I actually think this model's actually pretty good. I actually quite like the sculpting on this. I think they did a really nice job on the details here. It managed to pick out a lot of the stuff that makes him an interesting looking character. I quite like the mace design, and I like the scars on his chest and things like that. And I think they've brought out his facial details really nicely. I think the white warg has been done really well as well. And I think they did a really nice job on bringing that to life. And the mounted version of it doesn't look awkward, which is one thing that I was always a little bit worried about when it comes to mounted stuff, especially on wargs. It is a resin kit, so it's going to be fine cast, which is a little unfortunate. But yeah, pretty cool model. Pretty nice style and look to him, as if he's about to strike down at his foes. You've got the kind of mirroring of the evil intent between the different forces, with him having this mace that looks like Sauron's mace, I suppose, as well, which is an interesting sort of aesthetic choice. But otherwise, kind of cool. You've got Bolg, so this is his lieutenant. So you've got the Castellan of Mount Gundabad. Again, really like the on-foot model of him. Looks like he's got a real sense of purpose as he kind of strides forwards into battle. I've never been necessarily a fan of the kind of idea that the armor's kind of embedded in him, though. That always looks a bit weird and a bit off to me. But an interesting model all the same, and I like the kind of style and stature that he has. I think his warg looks really dumb. I think they've done an interesting job on the warg there. It just looks a bit derpy to me. I mean, he doesn't look too bad riding it, but I think the warg itself just looks really odd. Again, resin model. Yep, resin kit. So, you know, not necessarily one that you're going to be picking up, but an interesting model all the same. You got the Gundabad Orc Captain. Now, I actually quite like these armoured Gundabad Orcs. I think they did an okay job on these. Some of them look a bit weird, some of them don't. They're kind of like a mix between Mordor Orcs and the Uruk-hai from the Two Towers and the Return of the King and stuff as well, in their kind of design. But a little bit more haphazard, so you can see like they've so smashed holes in the helmets to make the eyes. And all the plates feel a little bit more janky and kind of riveted together and stuff. So, you know, not a bad miniature, but then you've got to pay £50 for it. We're not talking about price. We're not talking about price. So you got the Gundabad Orc Warband there as well, which is going to be storming forward. I quite like these helms here. So these kind of like smaller pot helm style designs. I'm not necessarily a fan of the big kind of tower helm, which I guess is trying to mimic the look of Gundabad, I suppose. But you know, other than that, I think they look a bit stupid and derpy. It's cool to have like properly heavily armoured orcs, though. I think that's a nice way for them to go. They've got some interesting bits and pieces in there, which is kind of cool. The other thing that has been added into the mix with Azog's Legion, actually, is that they have the biggest selection of Finecast stuff for you to pick from. And this is potentially where I think the Force becomes a little bit more interesting. Now, I really don't like Melty McMelterface here. This is the guy that I'm not a fan of. I just feels like the entire model has been kind of like made with candle wax. And I know that sounds really harsh, but I'm just not a fan of the model. It just looks a bit plasticine-y, which, you know, kind of works if you're trying to get the look of a cool movie prop, I suppose. But other than that, I'm not necessarily a massive fan of that. What I've got, ogres as well, the mercenaries. Don't really like the warbats. I do like the goblin mercenaries. I think they're really nice, and I think they were sort of underutilized in the movie. I think they look really cool, and I like the idea of them basically getting a bunch of goblin mercenaries and kind of smashing armor onto them to use in battle. And I like that they're kind of an upgrade to what we had previously with what happened in Goblin Town and that kind of thing. So I think they're kind of cool. I like those. I also like the Berserkers. I think they're a nice addition, kind of in line a little bit with Azog himself, and how they look on the tabletop and how they look in battle and things. Quite like they've got almost like they kind of give me essentially sort of like hobgoblin feels, which is kind of cool. So you've got a kind of cross maybe between goblins and orcs to kind of create this new breed of killer. The thing that's really interesting about a lot of this stuff, though, is that it gets this... It's a lot of the stuff from the Lord of the Rings, especially for Evil, had a very realistic feel to it, because I think for the most part, actors were in the suits, and so everything was human proportions and that kind of thing. And so when it came to sculpting those, you had this sense of realism running through the range, and I think that led to them feeling detailed and, again, more human-like. I think when you come to some of the stuff for Azog's Legion, because it's been based on stuff that is essentially CGI created, that's obviously allowed them to do interesting things with the anatomy and the changing to that and stuff. But then there's just something strange about the look and feel of the models in the army that just almost feels a little bit uncanny. Like, that's not a bad model, but for me it just doesn't, it's oddly doesn't feel like a Lord of the Rings model, if you know what I mean. Like, it's great, but I could see that in another game, not necessarily The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings or Middle-earth in general. So yeah, it's a really interesting mixed bag when it comes to Azog's Legion as a force on the tabletop. I said I wouldn't talk about price, but oh my god, trying to collect a Hobbit force is expensive. There's also the Troll Brute as well, which I think is okay, but again, I'm not a fan of the design, to be honest. You know, they were building up the Hobbit trilogy to be a little bit darker than I thought it should really have been. I think it would have been nice to have it maintain a little bit more of that kid-friendly thing, but having a tortured troll just seems like a terrifying idea. And he's changing his eyes. I mean, that's terrifying. It's very PJ, but it's terrifying. So there we go. So yeah, interesting stuff for Azog's Legion. When it comes to rating this army and the armies in general that we're talking about throughout this video, what I tend to do with these is I'm rating them via the rule of cool. It's not about how good they are on the tabletop. It's not about how effective they are in game. It's essentially based on my own opinion of how cool they are and what I think about them. So, thinking about Azog's Legion, I love the idea of running an Azog's Legion as a kind of as a Null Bazaar style affair on the tabletop. I really like that idea, and doing like big armored orcs with Azog when he was younger, fighting outside the gates of Moria, rather than it being done as a Battle of Five Armies kind of deal. And I do quite like a lot of the sculpts. As I say, I really like the sculpt for Azog, and that mounted version's really nice. As you can see there, I really like the sculpt for Bolg. He's kind of cool. And in general, the Gundabad Orcs are kind of awesome as well. And there are some interesting sculpts throughout the entire collection, but I just think there's something a little bit odd about them, really. I don't think they're... I think we're going to give them B, because I think there's a lot of really nice stuff in there, but then there's also a bunch of really weird stuff that I can't get my head around. So we'll stick him right in the middle with a B, I think. Yeah, we'll do B. We'll do B. Cool. So next up, we're going to do Azog's Hunters. Azog's Hunters. So this is like Yazneg and all that stuff, and all the big wargs and stuff like that. So we're going to bring them into the mix. I know that they're slightly different way around on here, but we're going to go through this. We're going to go by this. Okay, so here we go. So yes, Yazneg and his boys. So let's fire up Azog's Hunters on the old Games Workshop. And of course it is frozen because it always does. There we go. Boom. Boom. So, Narzug and Fimbul. Open, will you? Where is he? Yazneg. The Hunter Orcs. And the Hunter Orcs. Boom, boom, boom. Do they have any more? No, they don't. Right, so... cool, right. Again, interesting designs and ideas for the Hunter Orcs. Really like this chap. I think it looks really cool. Kind of okay, I guess. A mounted version that's pretty neat, I suppose. Some interesting stuff there for characters wise, which I think is quite cool. I like that they've done them with the idea that I like the idea of jumping into an army where you don't have to play the big guys. So you don't have to go and immediately take, if it was Lord of the Rings, you don't have to take Aragorn, you don't have to take Boromir. You can take someone who's a little bit lower down in the list. As I was talking about last week, I like the idea of playing as kind of like the everyman hero. So Gamling was really awesome. I think the same thing could be said about the orcs and stuff here. So, you know, I like the idea of playing as Narzug and Fimbul and having those characters being played as the leaders of your force, rather than someone like Azog or Bolg and that kind of stuff. And again, really nice design on some of the armor and stuff like that. And I really like the kind of like serrated blade that he has. This one looks like it could be like a stolen elven blade that he's nicked away from someone. And I again, the Fell Warg design is really nice, and I really like the look of that. I think that's a really good choice aesthetically. I think that carries through into Yazneg as well. Not a massive fan of this weird kind of like shoulder armor that he has. I think that's a bit odd. And again, there's just something about the stuff that we get from this which feels a little bit kind of melty and meh, which is a very strange way of saying that. I think the CGI design was a bit weird and the costume design was a bit off. But you know, otherwise, pretty cool character. Again, looks really nice mounted on his warg. I'd maybe look for some kind of way to do something different with this, but then maybe I wouldn't be necessarily brave enough to cut all that off. But yeah, an interesting model in the whole, and I kind of like the design of him. I feel like he would be an absolute pain in the arse to clean up when he came out of the Finecast mold, but yeah, an interesting character. And again, fun to see some new alternative orc designs. See, it doesn't look so bad from the back, which is where you're mostly going to see him, I suppose. But it just looks a bit odd from the front. I like all the detail on his face, though, and I like the scars and things, and I think he works quite nicely as an alternative orc character. And then you've got the Hunter Orcs and stuff. Now, something odd is going on with these Hunter Orcs. Feels like all the poses are a bit weird. I guess they've tried to make it so that they are in like action-y dynamic poses, and I do appreciate that they're plastic, which is nice, but there's just something weird about the sculpts for these Hunter Orcs. As a core troop for your army, I think they'd be really odd to paint. But I do quite like some of the designs. Like, I really like that one there. That's kind of cool. And I like this guy with the double blades. He's kind of awesome. But yeah, it just feels like somewhere on the line they kind of bashed the kit together. But overall, it's not necessarily too bad. There are some cool ideas. It's just I think the posing is off. I mean, that is such a weird pose. What are you going to do, I suppose, right? The Hunter Orcs on Felwargs actually look a little bit better, in my opinion. Again, I really like the Felwarg design. I think the Felwargs are very nice, and they feel like a something that was left over in the design from Del Toro's work, potentially. I really kind of like the way that that's been presented. And I think they look really nice as kind of like an alternative. It's a shame they didn't just have them be the same wargs as the first one, but, you know, especially when PJ took over. But I guess a lot of work had been done already, so you don't really want to be going back and doing that again, do you? Again, really odd stuff going on with some of the faces and some of the designs there, but not a terrible idea when it comes to an army on the tabletop. So what do you do? What do you do with the Azog's Hunters? I think it'd be a really fun army to run because you'd forget Bolg and Azog. You wouldn't have them in the equation, in my opinion. You'd run Nazug, Fimble, and Yazneg, and you'd run the Hunter Orcs and the Hunter Orcs on Felwargs alongside them, and you'd do it as a themed force as when they were chasing the company of Thorin through the fields as they're on the way to Rivendell. I think that'd be a cool way of doing it. I think that'd be a nice option. So yeah, a cool, interesting idea for a force that you could take in a different direction. Some slightly questionable sculpts. Some thumbs up for some of it being plastic, which is always nice to have. But otherwise, I'm not entirely sure. It's definitely not S tier. But I think based on the majority of sculpts alone and the designs that they've gone for, I actually think, I mean, when you look at them there, they look pretty awesome. Maybe it's just the fact that there's a lot of wargs. But you know what? I'm going to go A. I know it's controversial, but by the rules of cool, I genuinely think that they could be a really fun army to play on the tabletop. And I think they've got a really nice selection of miniatures in the round. Not as a whole, but in the round, I think they've got a pretty nice selection of miniatures, which is kind of cool. So, yeah. Moving on then. Oh, God. Oh, here we go. Moving on, we're going to be looking at the Dark Powers of Dol Guldur. So, boom. Sauron the Necromancer, the only model. No, they've got some more over here as well. I'll click these on. Boom, boom, boom. And of course, this website is broken as well. There we go. Boom. Boom. So, okay. Sauron the Necromancer. Older model, but still checks out, in my opinion. I really like the design of it. I've always wanted to have a version of this to paint. I like the idea that he's sort of looming forward and drifting towards the enemy. I love the idea that you could play around with kind of like ghost colours on the front and then move into black and shadow on the back. I kind of do like a fade between the two, a blend. Then you've got his kind of classic metal armour that you could give a green tint to as well. And there's the Eye of Sauron there in his chest too. Pretty cool in the round, I think. An interesting model to throw into the mix. I think he's kind of cool. I think he's a badass, and you know he's going to be leading your army most of the time. So you know you're going to have him at some point. You also have the Castellans of Dol Guldur, which I think are really nice models as well. I've broken everything. Here we go. Again, really nice models. I really like the look of them. They've got kind of like Masters of the Universe He-Man swords, which is a bit weird. But other than that, I really like their design, and I like the idea of playing as with some really cool, kind of really dark, dangerous, almost kind of Black Numenorian style individuals in your games. I think that's a really cool way of going with the designs and the look. Again, older models, but I think they still check out. And then you have some additional characters. So you've got the Keeper of the Dungeons, which was going to be the design for Bolg, I believe, before they changed it. Very cool model. I absolutely love the design. I like that it came back in the extended edition and was actually used for something, because as far as I'm aware, he dies in the Battle of Anulbazar, which is a bit of a shame, I suppose. But very cool model. Really like the look of him and the design. It's nice that he's been done as a Forge World resin miniature as well, actually. So all the details should be kept through. And he's just awesome. I like the idea of him leading a band of brutal orcs. Or just being a solo killer, to be honest. Ready to kick ass and take names. And then you have these. I like that they went down the route of doing a whole host of different styles of armor to represent the different kings that would have been around during the period of their fall, you know, back in the day when they took the rings. That's awesome, right? And for the majority of the models, namely these ones, I think they look really cool. It's this guy at the back with the dumb horned helm that I just cannot get my head around. Let me see if I can find him. Here he is. Oh my god. What a Dumbo. He just looks so dumb. I cannot get my head around the design for that guy. But anyway. I genuinely think all the other miniatures in this look really cool. And as well as being really nice for use in kind of third age stuff, I also think they'd be pretty cool as options to be used in something a little bit first and second agey as well, which is kind of a nice way to go and think about it too. That's a weird weapon. It just seems like a weapon made for the sake of making a weapon. But anyway, nice models. Very cool designs. Would be fun would be very easy to paint. It's just black and silver, isn't it, really? And in the round, not a bad selection of miniatures. There's just one that I think is really dumb. I like the themes and the idea of making a Dol Guldur style army. I think having Sauron as the middle man is really cool. Doesn't go with the whole idea of me playing with kind of just like, you know, the everyman soldier or whatever. But I think if you're gonna hit a theme, I think having Sauron the Necromancer and all of his Sauron-y necromancy followers is just pretty on the money. And so I think it looks kind of awesome. I think it'd be really fun to run them. And also you got the new plastic kits for the Ruins of Dol Guldur as well, so you can make a nice background and tabletop for them at the same time. So yeah, you know what? The Dark Denizens of is it the Dark Denizens? Yeah, the Dark Powers of Dol Guldur. I think they go there. I think that's kind of cool. And you know what? I think I'm going to drop this down here. I'm putting them in C, and the Dark Powers of Dol Guldur go there. There we go. Right, next. Now it's spiders and everything else in between, and that was the only good photo I could find of them. So this, I think, could be the winner. Right. Okie dokie. Get rid of those. There's something to be said, in my mind, for running something completely off the wall. And if you're going to go off the wall, I think one of the best ways to do it is to make an entire army of monsters. So run a big spider queen who comes with all of her little sneaky spiders that are bursting out of the grounds and sneaking around and trying to capture you. Really awesome monster design. Would be really fun to paint. I love the idea that you're doing something entirely natural and organic rather than having to work with armor. I think that's a beautiful model still, even in metal. And I think they did a really nice job on that. Oh, and it's just so creepy with the little spiders poking out all the holes, the one body. Ugh, makes me crawl at this particular point. You got the same thing, I think, with the Spiders of Middle-earth. So a nice little set of miniatures that you could use for dropping into a whole host of different collections and things, because obviously you can use these with Moria and that stuff as well. But I really like the look of these. I like the big spiders there sneaking around, and you've got the smaller ones as well. So yeah, 2 different styles of spiders for you to drop into your games, mix things up a little bit, which is kind of cool. Again, really nice gribbly design. Would be fun to paint, going with kind of like that little furry texture on their bodies and their abdomen and stuff, and then doing all their weird spindly legs as well. And it would just be great seeing them scuttling along the table as they sneak forward to try and eat you. You've also got the Felwargs, which, as I've said, are just a glorious kit, and I think they're just like super fun. Really good wolves, really nice designs. Would be really fun to paint. You've got the dry brushing element that goes into their skin and stuff, and the fur on their backs. You've got the scars and their teeth, which are really nice as well. And they're in good poses too, so they're all kind of like loping forward, trying to get to you, and you've got one snarling as well at the back. Going to be very nice for scenario play as well, because you're probably going to need some of these to play out some scenarios that don't necessarily involve orcs at the same time. But yeah, a good selection of models there. And then you've got the Bat Swarm, which I could give or take. I think it looks a bit Warhammer Fantasy. I'm not necessarily sure that I would play around too much with bats compared to like spiders and wolves, but it's a fun little thing to throw into the mix anyway. I think they're the weak point in this collection, this army. But other than that, not too bad. The Denizens of Mirkwood. The Dark Denizens of Mirkwood. Man, I've gushed over that force. There's not a lot of models in it, but there's just something about them. I think they would be super fun to play, super fun to paint, and take things in a really different and interesting direction. So, boom, they go right to the top. I never thought I'd say that I really like painting spiders, but there we go. Very cool. Next on the agenda, we're going to be looking at the goblins of Goblin Town. Crumping down through the lines. Oh, God, I've lost it. Right, okay, so the goblins of Goblin Town. Let's bring them up. And we don't have anything there, do we? No, we don't. So, not a lot, again, for this force, to be honest. So you get the Goblin King. Interesting model. Something a bit weird and uncanny about it, potentially, in its design. Which is a bit off, I suppose. I kind of like the look and feel of the miniature. Particularly in the facial details. But he wasn't necessarily that fun to paint. I have painted up a version of him alongside some of the Goblin Town miniatures as well. And it was kind of cool. But there's just something about them that doesn't necessarily work for me. They feel a bit, again, doughy and waxy, as if they've kind of been mushed together out of different things, rather than kind of sculpted to have like a realistic feel to them, which is a bit odd, I suppose, for a fantasy world, but there we go. But yeah, interesting stuff. You've got, is it Grinner? I think it's Grinner. Yeah, Grinner and the Goblin Scribe are in there as well. Sort of loping around behind him at the same time, which is cool, I suppose. And I like that he can kind of like zip off to try and summon more to the aid of the Goblin King. I like the idea that you can just make a really fun themed force very quickly. You can dive in, you can immediately have a theme set up without too much hassle. I'm not, as I say, I'm not necessarily a fan of the design of the Goblin King himself. I think other versions of goblins that are kind of big and hefty have been done better by other companies. Like I think the North Star, one of the North Star Goblin Generals, looks better as a Goblin King in my mind. But that's because I'm kind of going back to the kind of Bakshi era and that kind of style of the goblins, I think, in my head when I think about the Hobbit. But an interesting idea as a whole, I think, just not necessarily well executed. He does have some fun bits of terrain. I do like this with the little poop bucket underneath it. So weird. And I'm sure you could do some fun stuff with the painting of the Goblin King as well, if you put your mind to it. The Goblin Warriors, again, just a bit weird and waxy looking and feeling. They are incredibly easy to paint because a lot of it's just sort of dry brushing and washes, to be honest. and then you just kind of pick out some of the details with their loincloths and their sort of weird scraggly hair. If you want to play a huge swarm of models on the tabletop that are going to get crushed by everything in their way until they trap it and kill it, then I think this is a kind of a fun way to go. Could be neat to see played on the tabletop. I don't necessarily think that I'd do it myself, but you know, interesting stuff. And then of course you can throw Gollum into the mix as well. And there's always some nice miniatures of Gollum and Bilbo and that kind of thing as well. But the core of your army is going to be based around these, to be honest. Some of them look good, some of them look awful. It's a little bit like the Hunter Orcs, I think, actually, for the Goblins of Goblin Town. What do I think about this as an army, then? They don't immediately speak out to me as something that I'd want to collect, which is kind of a bad sign, I suppose, when it comes to an army. Like, they're not Azog's Legion. Are they better than... would I prefer to collect more of Azog's Legion? I think I would, because of the whole sort of like building a fun army to kind of use at the Battle of Moria kind of thing. They're not so terrible that they'd be all the way in D. Yeah, they're going to be a C. They're going to be a C. They're going to be a C. The Trolls. Tom, Bill and Bert. Here they come to save the day. Bum, bum, bum. The Trolls. Now, I think this is a lovely kit. It's also in plastic, which is amazing. Now, again, there's something a bit weird about the sculpting of these that makes them feel doughy compared to the old ones, in my opinion. But, I mean, admittedly, it's not necessarily an army because it's 3 models. But I do like the idea of running the Trolls as a force, and literally that just being the army that you collect. I think you could have a lot of fun painting them. My only issue would be is that if you were going to paint them in the style of the movie, with them being a lot more fleshy, I think you would struggle to get a really nice result out of the painting process. I think if you tried to paint them a little bit more in sort of earthier tones, so going for a little bit more brown maybe in there as well, that kind of fades in and blends into their kind of pinky skin. I think that could be kind of interesting, or maybe going like full kind of greys and a sort of off-whites potentially could be quite fun for these. I like the idea that you've got 3 fun characters. I like that the focus is entirely on them. I like that they can all play differently and you can make up fun noises and sounds as you're playing with them on the tabletop. I like that you get a fire that they've been roasting things on as well, which is really cool. And I like the poses and the detail that they've got in their faces. I'm just not necessarily a fan of the bodies, I suppose. But in general, I think it's really nice as a collection. And actually probably would be really fun to paint. I think there's something about them that's just insanely charming, especially because of the moment in the books and of course in the movies where you see them, that I think is undeniably fun. So you know what? I mean, what's not to like about that as a fun little themed force, to be honest, on the tabletop. Boom, 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 boom. Are they as good as Yazneg's Hunters? I don't think so. So we're going to put them there. So, you know, they're an A-tier army. I'd love to collect them and paint them. Actually, I'd love to collect them and paint them. So they've got to go there. They got to go there. Yeah, I would actually love to paint them compared to working on Yazneg and his Hunters. I think that'd be really fun. So yeah, they're going to be like top A-tier, I think, in my mind. Very cool. Last but not least. Ooh, here we go. Last but not least. The Desolator of the North himself, Smaug. Now, my channel is called Because of Dragons, because I like dragons, right? Do I like Smaug? Yes. Do I like his portrayal in the movies? Mostly. I really like the thing that what Benedict Cumberbatch did with his voice. I think that's really cool, and I like the way that he was presented. He's more of a wyvern than he is a dragon in my mind, but all of them are drakes, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. Let's not get into the semantics of that Do I like the model? Yes. Would I buy it? No, I would not buy it. Because I wouldn't know what to do with it. I would have it and it would look beautiful, but I would get someone else to paint it, I think, if I was going to pick up my version, a version of Smaug. I actually have, there's a dragon that I prefer a lot more in the Moria list. See, I really like that dragon. I think that is a very cool dragon miniature. And I know not a lot of people necessarily agree compared to Smaug. And Smaug is objectively a better looking dragon in the round, with a lot more detail. It's got a huge heft to it. It makes sense as a huge, proud, mighty drake worm that Smaug was, obviously. And I think the design is beautiful. And it was I think it was the last thing that the Perrys did for the Middle-earth range before they went off on their merry way. And it is kind of cool, but I just think I'd never get around to doing anything cool with it and fun with it. I don't think. I think it would sit there in a box, and I'd get very sad that I'd spent £420 on it, or like £400 on it. And also, I wouldn't necessarily trust that it would be easy to put together, and all that kind of good stuff as well. So while Smaug is a very cool creature, monster, and it would be fun to see it on the tabletop, I just don't think that I would get the same glee out of it as some of the other armies in the collection. Does that make it a D? No, because I do like dragons. I don't think anything was ever going to be like a proper D. So I'm going to go and put this in the bottom end of C, we'll say the bottom end of C. Yeah, I think so. I think that makes sense. I think that's kind of good as a collection of tier rankings for the Hobbit. It's not necessarily the biggest selection of stuff, and there's some weird models in there in the collection as a whole, but I think this kind of settles down as a fun little way to do things. Making a big army of spiders would be really fun. I love the idea of that. I love the theme. Would be fun to paint. Would be cool on the tabletop. The trolls, also really nice idea how to paint them and play around with some of the looks for them. I think would be kind of fun, and would obviously be nice to play with them on the tabletop. Do a little themed force. Lovely. The Yazneg, I like the idea of playing as those middlemen orcs rather than playing as Azog and Bolg and fighting with them on the tabletop. I think it'd be really fun, alongside those really nice Felwag miniatures and also the sort of regular troops as well. I think that could be nice. The Dark Powers of Dol Guldur, again, interesting idea. I love the idea of playing around with Sauron at the middle of it. But as we kind of look at some of the other stuff in the range, I don't think it would necessarily be as fun and kind of like on the top of my list of I must pick these up kind of thing. And then we move to some of the stuff at the bottom. I just think there's something a little bit weird and uncanny about some of the miniatures in the Azog line. I'd like to play that kind of Battle of Moria style affair on the tabletop, where you have Azog and some of the armoured orcs. Expense aside, obviously, but that would be really fun to see played out on the tabletop, I think. That would be a cool way to go. Yeah, I think you could do some nice stuff with that. But in general, I just not necessarily a massive fan of the range. Again, that kind of doughy quality comes through in some of the other stuff from Goblin Town, so they're not necessarily going to be up there compared to some of the other stuff out there. And then right at the bottom, not because I don't like the sculpt, but because I just don't think I would ever come around to the idea of finding it cool to work on the model and bring it to the tabletop. Smaug's just got to be down there, I think, unfortunately. Maybe I would be more likely to collect both of those than I would Smaug, so I think that kind of pushes them up in the rule of cool rankings. But there we go. Anyway, what do you guys think? Man, that was a long video. That was 40 minutes. Wow, Jesus. I apparently have a lot to waffle and say. I hope you've done some good painting during this. Wow, Jesus. But yeah. What do you think of my my rankings? Do you agree? Do you think things should be shifted around? Is there a weird, uncanny quality to some of the stuff from the Hobbit range? what should be on the top in your mind, what will be on the bottom, where would you switch things around, what would you do differently, what do you wish they would add to the range? Do you think that they could build some new interesting plastic kits and things? I think so. They're not going to, because the Hobbit was not very successful, but there we go. But yeah, some fun stuff there that would be interesting to dive into and have a look at what you think in the comments. So yeah, don't forget to comment, like, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff. And don't forget, there's also a Ko-fi link down there as well. So if you want to donate a little bit of extra moolah to me to buy some cups of tea and coffee for when I'm painting away, then that would be great. But yeah, I'll be back in another video very soon. Bye for now.